The coffee had gone cold in my mug as I stared at the television screen, watching what should have been routine protest footage. Channel 7's live coverage of the labor rights demonstration downtown droned on with the usual talking heads, analyzing crowd size and permit disputes. I was supposed to be reviewing opposition research files on 3 progressive candidates, building the ammunition Congressman Hayes would need to destroy them in the upcoming election cycle. Instead, I found myself frozen, remote control slack in my hand, staring at a familiar face in the crowd. Carmen held a bright red sign that read, "4 years together, still fighting," in bold white letters. She stood near the front of the demonstration, her dark hair pulled back in the ponytail she always wore when she meant business. The camera lingered on her for just a moment before panning across the sea of protesters. But it was enough. 4 years together. We'd been married for 8. I set down my coffee and reached for my phone, scrolling through our text messages from the weekend. Visiting mom in Richmond. Her back is acting up again. Might stay through Monday to help with doctor appointments. Love you. The timestamp showed Friday at 2:17 p.m. The protest was happening in downtown D.C., not Richmond, and the sign in her hands suggested a timeline that didn't match our marriage certificate. The television anchor's voice cut through my thoughts. Labor organizer Miguel Santos addresses the crowd now, calling for increased worker protections and opposition to corporate-backed political candidates. The camera zoomed in on a man with salt and pepper hair and an expensive leather jacket that seemed incongruous with his working-class rhetoric. Santos spoke with the practiced charisma of someone who knew how to work a crowd, his voice carrying that perfect balance of righteous anger and measured control that marked professional agitators. "We've been fighting this battle for 4 years," Santos declared into the microphone. 4 years of organizing, 4 years of building our movement, 4 years of awakening people to the truth about who's really pulling the strings in Washington. 4 years. Again? I rewound the footage and watched it 3 more times, studying Carmen's face as Santos spoke. She watched him with the kind of intense focus I hadn't seen her direct at anything in months. Certainly not at me. The protest was about labor rights, union protections, and opposition to what Santos called corporate puppet politicians. Everything Carmen claimed to care about. Everything my boss, Congressman William Hayes, stood firmly against. Everything I spent my professional life fighting. I turned off the television and walked to my home office, pulling out the files I'd been reviewing. Hayes wanted comprehensive opposition research on 3 progressive candidates by Wednesday. Standard procedure, financial records, voting histories, personal associations, anything that could be weaponized during campaign season. But right now, I had a different research project in mind. Carmen's political awakening had been gradual, or so I thought. It started about 4 years ago with increased interest in her teachers' union activities. More evening meetings, weekend conferences, passionate dinner table conversations about education funding and worker rights. I'd supported it initially. Carmen was brilliant, and her dedication to her students was one of the things I'd fallen in love with. If she wanted to get more involved in union politics, that was her choice. We didn't have to agree on everything. The problem started when her activism began targeting everything I worked for professionally. Carmen would come home from union meetings fired up about corporate-backed politicians and establishment lackeys who sold out working families. She never said my name directly, but the implications were clear. Our dinner conversations became ideological battlegrounds. Carmen would cite statistics about income inequality while I explained the economic benefits of business-friendly policies. She'd talk about grassroots movements while I defended institutional stability. We'd go to bed angry more often than not. Over the past year, it had gotten worse. Carmen attended union events 3 or 4 nights a week. Weekend conferences became overnight trips. She'd return home energized and militant, full of new talking points that sounded increasingly sophisticated and coordinated. And she'd stopped wearing her wedding ring to political events. I'd noticed it 6 months ago when she showed me photos from an education rally. Carmen stood with a group of teachers holding protest signs, her left hand clearly visible and conspicuously bare. When I asked about it, she said rings got caught on sign handles and it was easier to leave it at home. The explanation made sense at the time. Now it felt like another piece of a puzzle I'd been too distracted to solve. I opened my laptop and started with basic research techniques. Miguel Santos, labor organizer, Washington, D.C. area. The internet yielded a wealth of information about his activist organization, Community Action Coalition, and his role in various progressive movements. Santos had been involved in labor organizing for 15 years, with a particular focus on what he called comprehensive life activism. His organization's website featured testimonials from people who'd undergone political awakening through his workshops and training sessions. One testimonial caught my attention. Miguel helped me realize that my personal relationships were holding back my political development. He taught me that sometimes you have to choose between comfort and conviction. Another. The Community Action Coalition showed me how to separate from people who don't share my values, even family members. Miguel says personal and political can't be divided. I cross-referenced the dates of Santos's public appearances with Carmen's claimed union activities. Every single event matched. Every conference Carmen had attended alone featured Santos as the keynote speaker. Every workshop she'd mentioned aligned with his organization's training calendar. For 4 years, Carmen had been attending events run by a man who specialized in radicalizing people against their own families. Tuesday morning brought a text from Carmen. Conference running late. Won't be home until Thursday evening. Sorry to miss dinner with the Hendersons. The Henderson dinner had been planned for weeks. Carmen knew how important maintaining relationships with Hayes' major donors was for my career. Her absence would be noticed and remembered. I called the hotel where Carmen claimed to be staying for her education conference. No one by her name was registered. I tried 3 other hotels in the conference city. Nothing. At the office, I struggled to focus on the opposition research Hayes had requested. The files contained standard political intelligence, financial records, voting patterns, personal associations. But my mind kept drifting to my own personal intelligence gap. David, you seem distracted today. Congressman Hayes stood in my office doorway, his expression concerned. At 62, Hayes had the silver-haired gravitas of someone who'd spent 3 decades navigating Washington power structures. He'd hired me 8 years ago specifically for my ability to destroy political opponents through meticulous research and strategic information warfare. Just tired, sir. Late night finishing the Henderson file. Hayes nodded approvingly. Henderson was a progressive city council member with gubernatorial ambitions. My research had uncovered a web of questionable financial relationships that would end his political career if strategically released. Good work? That information will be very useful. Hayes sat down across from my desk. David, I've been thinking about your future here. You're the best opposition researcher I've ever worked with. Your ability to find and exploit weaknesses is remarkable. Thank you, sir. But I need you focused. This election cycle is crucial for our agenda. Any distractions could be costly. Hayes leaned forward slightly. Is everything all right at home? You've seemed off your game lately. For a moment, I considered telling him everything. Hayes had been a mentor for nearly a decade. His political instincts were sharp, and his network of contacts could probably solve my Carmen problem with a few phone calls. But revealing personal problems would damage my professional credibility. Hayes valued emotional control and strategic thinking. Admitting that my wife was involved with a radical organizer who opposed everything we worked for would raise questions about my judgment and security clearance. Everything's fine, sir. Carmen's just been busy with union activities. Hayes' expression sharpened slightly. Union activities? Teachers' union. Education conferences, that sort of thing? I see. Hayes was quiet for a moment. David, you understand that your security clearance requires disclosure of any potential conflicts of interest? Of course, sir. Good. Because if your wife were involved with any radical organizations or individuals who oppose our work, that could create problems. Hayes stood up. I trust you'll handle any complications appropriately. After he left, I sat staring at my computer screen, the weight of his words settling over me. Hayes wasn't just my boss. He was one of the most powerful conservatives in Congress. If he suspected that Carmen's activism posed a security risk, my career would be over. I had to handle this situation myself, using the same skills that made me valuable to Hayes in the first place. Wednesday evening, I drove to the address listed for Santos's Community Action Coalition. The building was a converted warehouse in a gentrifying neighborhood, the kind of place that attracted young professionals who wanted to feel authentic while fighting the establishment. I parked across the street and waited. At 7:30 p.m., people began arriving for what the organization's website described as a community organizing workshop, building resistance networks. Carmen arrived at 7:45 p.m. in her blue Honda Civic, the same car she'd supposedly driven to Richmond for her weekend with her sick mother. She walked into the building with the confident stride of someone who belonged there. I waited until 8 p.m., then called her phone. Hey, honey, she answered after 3 rings. I can't talk long. The conference dinner is starting soon. How's your mom feeling? Better, thanks. The doctor gave her some new medication for her back. I'll probably head home tomorrow afternoon. In the background, I could hear what sounded like a group discussion about organizing tactics and political resistance. Nothing that resembled a conference dinner. That's great. Give her my love. I will. Love you too. She hung up, and I sat in my car staring at the building where my wife was learning to be a better liar. At 9:30 p.m., the workshop ended and people began filing out. Carmen emerged with Santos, walking close together in conversation. They stopped beside her car, talking for another 10 minutes before Santos pulled her into what looked like a casual goodbye hug. Except the hug lasted too long, and Santos's hand lingered on Carmen's lower back in a way that suggested familiarity. I followed Santos when he left the building, staying several cars behind as he drove to an upscale apartment complex in DuPont Circle, the kind of place that cost 3 times what a labor organizer should be able to afford. Santos lived in Unit 412. I made a note of the address and drove home to my empty house. Thursday morning, I began building a comprehensive file on Miguel Santos using the same techniques I employed for political opposition research: public records, financial documents, social media activity, professional associations. Santos's financial situation was immediately suspicious. His Community Action Coalition was registered as a non-profit organization, which meant his salary should be publicly available. According to tax filings, Santos earned $58,000 annually as the organization's executive director. Yet he lived in a $4,200 per month apartment, drove a new BMW, and wore expensive clothes. Either Santos had significant external income sources, or his organization was receiving undisclosed funding. I dug deeper into the Community Action Coalition's financial records. The organization reported $2.3 million in annual revenue, with major donations from several progressive foundations. But there were also numerous smaller donations from organizations I didn't recognize. One name appeared repeatedly: International Workers' Solidarity Fund. A little research revealed this was a front organization with ties to foreign political groups that had been flagged by the Treasury Department for suspicious financial activity. Santos wasn't just a radical organizer. He was potentially taking money from hostile foreign interests. This changed everything. If Santos was receiving foreign funding for domestic political activities, he was required to register as a foreign agent under federal law. Failure to register was a felony that carried serious prison time. And if Carmen was involved with his organization, she could be implicated in federal crimes. I spent the rest of the day building a comprehensive case file on Santos's financial irregularities and potential foreign connections. By evening, I had enough evidence to destroy him completely. But I wanted more than just Santos. I wanted to understand exactly how deep Carmen's involvement went. Carmen came home Thursday evening acting like nothing had happened. She kissed me hello, asked about my day, and showed me a small gift she'd supposedly bought for me at the conference. "How was the workshop on curriculum development?" I asked over dinner. "Really informative. We talked about ways to integrate social justice themes into standard lesson plans." Carmen's voice carried the enthusiasm she always showed when discussing education. "There's so much potential to help students think critically about systemic issues. That sounds like political indoctrination." Carmen's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "It's not indoctrination to teach students about inequality and social justice. That's education. Teaching students your political beliefs is exactly what indoctrination means." "My political beliefs?" Carmen set down her fork and looked at me with the expression she reserved for particularly obtuse students. "David, caring about working families isn't a political belief. It's basic human decency." "And I suppose my work represents basic human indecency?" "Your work represents corporate interests that exploit working families for profit." Carmen's voice was rising. "You spend your days finding ways to destroy people who fight for education funding and worker protections. I spend my days supporting candidates who believe in economic growth and fiscal responsibility. You spend your days supporting candidates who take money from corporations that want to eliminate unions and cut education budgets." Carmen stood up from the table. "Sometimes I wonder how I ended up married to someone who fights against everything I believe in." She left the kitchen, and I heard her footsteps going upstairs. This was the most directly she'd ever criticized my work, and the words sounded like they'd been carefully rehearsed. Later that evening, I found Carmen on her laptop in the living room. When I walked in, she quickly closed whatever she'd been working on. "Just grading papers," she said, but her laptop had been angled away from the door in a way that suggested she'd been expecting me. That night, after Carmen fell asleep, I carefully opened her laptop. She'd left her email account open, and I scrolled through several weeks of messages. Most were routine school communications and correspondence with other teachers. But buried among the legitimate emails were messages from Santos and other Community Action Coalition members. The emails revealed a level of political coordination I hadn't suspected. Santos had been coaching Carmen on how to maintain operational security while conducting activism. He'd provided her with talking points for political discussions and strategies for managing resistance from unsympathetic family members. One email from Santos particularly caught my attention. "Remember that personal relationships often reflect political relationships. Someone who profits from oppression will resist your awakening. Stay focused on the mission." Carmen had responded, "It's hard when he's so completely captured by the system. Sometimes I think the only way to truly commit to the movement is to make a clean break from people who can't be awakened." Santos's reply, "That's exactly the kind of clarity we need." Political and personal liberation go hand in hand. I photographed several of the most damaging emails with my phone, then carefully closed the laptop and returned to bed. Carmen stirred slightly when I got under the covers, but didn't wake up. Lying in the darkness, I realized that my marriage wasn't just falling apart. It was being systematically destroyed by a man who viewed converting me into political opposition as both personal and professional victory. Friday morning, I called in sick to work and drove to Santos's apartment building. I'd learned from his emails that he held private strategy sessions with advanced activists on Friday afternoons. Carmen had mentioned needing to grade papers all day, but her car was parked in Santos's visitor lot. I waited in my car until 2 p.m., when Carmen emerged from the building with Santos and two other women I recognized from the Community Action Coalition website. They stood in the parking lot talking for several minutes before the other women left. Carmen and Santos remained by her car, their conversation growing more animated. Santos placed his hand on Carmen's shoulder, then pulled her into another of those two long hugs. This time, Carmen kissed him on the cheek before getting into her car. I followed Carmen as she drove not home, but to a mall across town. She spent 2 hours shopping, buying lingerie at Victoria's Secret, and an expensive bottle of wine at the liquor store. Purchases she charged to our joint credit card. When Carmen finally arrived home at 6 p.m., she was carrying only a bag from Barnes & Noble. "How was your day?" I asked when she walked into the kitchen. "Exhausting. Spent the whole day grading midterm exams." Carmen set down the bookstore bag. "I picked up that novel you mentioned wanting to read." "That was thoughtful." I looked at the bag, which contained a book I'd never mentioned and wouldn't read. "How many papers did you get through?" "About 40. Still have 20 more to finish this weekend." According to her email, Carmen only had 37 students total in all her classes combined. That evening, Carmen said she was too tired for dinner and went to bed early. I waited until I heard her shower running, then checked our credit card account online. The charges from her afternoon shopping trip were all there. $127 at Victoria's Secret, $89 at the wine store, $23 at Barnes & Noble, and $67 at a restaurant called Giuseppe's that she'd never mentioned visiting. Giuseppe's was 2 blocks from Santos's apartment building. Saturday morning, Carmen announced she was attending an all-day union strategy session. "Will you be home for dinner?" "Probably not. These sessions usually run late, and we're planning to grab dinner afterward to continue discussions." "What's the focus of today's session?" "Educational equity and budget advocacy." Carmen's answer came quickly, like she'd prepared it. "Boring policy stuff, mostly." Carmen left at 9 a.m., wearing the kind of carefully casual outfit she usually reserved for dates. After she was gone, I drove to the Community Action Coalition building. No cars in the parking lot, no signs of activity. I called the organization's main number. An automated message informed callers that the office was closed on weekends and would reopen Monday morning. Carmen was lying about where she was going, and she wasn't even being careful about it anymore. I drove to Santos's apartment complex and parked where I could see the visitor lot. Carmen's car was already there. For the next 8 hours, I sat in my car watching the building and thinking about what I was going to do. Carmen and Santos were having an affair, that much was obvious. But this wasn't just adultery. Santos was using his relationship with Carmen to gather intelligence about my work for Congressman Hayes. Carmen had access to my home office, where I kept confidential campaign strategy documents and opposition research files. She'd seen Hayes's donor lists, candidate assessments, and strategic plans. Information that could severely damage conservative candidates if it fell into the wrong hands. Information that a man with foreign funding sources would find very valuable. At 7:30 p.m., Carmen emerged from the building wearing different clothes than she'd had on that morning. She looked relaxed and satisfied in a way I hadn't seen in months. I followed her home, arriving 5 minutes after she did. "How was the union meeting?" I asked when she walked into the kitchen. "Productive. We developed some good strategies for the budget advocacy campaign." Carmen moved around the kitchen with unusual energy, putting away dishes and wiping down counters that were already clean. "I'm starving." The meeting ran through lunch and dinner. That's dedication. Sometimes you have to make sacrifices for the cause. Carmen paused in her cleaning and looked at me directly. "Some things are more important than personal comfort." Sunday, I drove to the office and used my access to Hayes's investigative resources to dig deeper into Santos's background. What I found confirmed my worst suspicions. Miguel Santos had a documented pattern of targeting women in politically mixed marriages. Over the past 5 years, at least 6 women had left their husbands after becoming involved with Santos's organization. All had been married to men in conservative politics, business, or law enforcement. Santos called it comprehensive political awakening, but the pattern was clear. He was systematically destroying marriages to advance his political agenda. More disturbing, several of these women had subsequently provided Santos with confidential information from their former spouse's work. Internal police documents, business strategies, political campaign plans. Information that Santos's organization had used to damage conservative causes. Carmen wasn't Santos's lover, she was his asset. And based on the foreign funding connections I'd uncovered, Santos might be more than just a radical organizer. He could be a foreign intelligence operative using American activists to gather sensitive political information. I spent Sunday evening building a comprehensive case file that would destroy Santos completely. Financial crimes, foreign agent violations, conspiracy charges. When I was finished, I had enough evidence to put him in federal prison for 20 years. But first, I wanted to understand exactly what Carmen had given him. Monday morning, I called Carmen's school and spoke with the principal's secretary. I'm calling to confirm that Carmen Park is attending the education conference in Philadelphia this week, I said. I need to update her travel information for our insurance. I'm sorry, but Mrs. Park isn't attending any conferences this week. She's teaching her regular schedule. Are you sure? She mentioned needing coverage for her classes. No, sir. Mrs. Park hasn't requested any substitute coverage. She's here today if you'd like me to transfer you to her classroom. That won't be necessary. Thank you. Carmen was supposed to be in Philadelphia for 3 days. Instead, she was teaching her regular classes and spending her evenings somewhere else. I drove to Santos's apartment building and confirmed that Carmen's car was in the visitor lot. Whatever was happening between them, it was intensifying. That evening, Carmen came home with a story about the conference's excellent workshops on trauma-informed teaching. She spoke enthusiastically about sessions she'd never attended, quoting presenters who didn't exist. After dinner, Carmen went upstairs to prepare lessons for the next day. I waited 30 minutes, then quietly followed her upstairs. Carmen was in my home office, photographing documents from my desk with her phone. Financial records for Hayes's major donors, strategy memos for upcoming campaigns, opposition research files on progressive candidates. She worked systematically, photographing each document from multiple angles to ensure clarity. When she finished with one file, she carefully returned it to its exact position before moving to the next. I watched from the hallway as my wife of 8 years methodically betrayed everything I'd worked for. Tuesday morning, I arrived at the office early and began implementing my plan to destroy Santos. But first, I needed to understand the full scope of the security breach. I reviewed every document Carmen had photographed the night before. Hayes's donor database, containing financial information for dozens of major conservative contributors. Campaign strategy documents for 3 upcoming elections. Opposition research files on progressive candidates, including detailed information about their vulnerabilities. Information that could be used to protect progressive candidates from conservative attacks and target conservative donors for harassment or worse. I made copies of everything Carmen had accessed, then secured the originals in my office safe. If this became a federal investigation, I'd need to document exactly what had been compromised. At 10 a.m., I called a contact at the FBI's Political Corruption Unit. Agent Morrison, this is David Park. I work for Congressman Hayes. David, good to hear from you. How can I help? I need to report a potential foreign agent violation. I have evidence that a political organizer named Miguel Santos is receiving funding from overseas sources without proper registration. That's serious. Can you send me what you have? I'm putting together a comprehensive file. There's also evidence of document theft and potential espionage activities. Espionage? Morrison's voice sharpened. What kind of documents? Congressional campaign strategies, donor information, opposition research files, sensitive political intelligence that could damage national security interests. David, I need you to bring everything you have to my office immediately. Don't discuss this with anyone else until we can assess the situation. Understood. I'll be there this afternoon. After hanging up, I called Hayes's office and requested an urgent meeting. Congressman Hayes listened without interruption as I explained Santos's foreign connections and pattern of targeting conservative families. I showed him the financial evidence, the pattern of marriage destruction, and the security implications. I did not mention Carmen's involvement. This is deeply troubling, Hayes said when I finished. If Santos is operating as an unregistered foreign agent, he poses a significant threat to our electoral process. Yes, sir. I've already contacted the FBI. Good. But David, how did you uncover this information? What led you to investigate Santos specifically? I'd prepared for this question. His organization has been targeting several of our donors' families. I noticed a pattern of marriage disruptions and decided to investigate. Hayes nodded slowly. And you're confident this information is accurate? Completely confident, sir. I have documented evidence of foreign funding violations, marriage targeting, and document theft. Document theft? Santos has been using his romantic relationships to gather confidential political information from conservative households. Several women have provided him with sensitive materials from their husband's work. Hayes was quiet for a long moment. David, I appreciate your thoroughness in protecting our interests. This kind of investigation is exactly why you're valuable to this organization. Thank you, sir. However, I need to ask directly. Is there any possibility that your own household has been compromised? The question hung in the air between us. Hayes was giving me an opportunity to come clean about Carmen's involvement. But admitting the security breach would end my career and possibly result in criminal charges for both Carmen and myself. No, sir. My household security protocols are comprehensive. Hayes studied my face for several seconds. I trust your judgment, David. Proceed with the FBI investigation and keep me informed of all developments. That afternoon, I met with Agent Morrison and 2 other FBI investigators. I presented my evidence against Santos systematically, financial records showing foreign funding, documentation of his marriage targeting pattern, and proof of his organization's intelligence gathering activities. This is substantial, Morrison said, reviewing the financial documents. Santos has clearly violated foreign agent registration requirements, but the intelligence gathering allegations are more complex. Do you have proof that specific documents were stolen? Yes. I handed him photographs of the documents Carmen had stolen, along with a list of the materials she'd accessed. These were taken from a congressional aide's home office. Whose home office? I'd reached the crucial moment. If I told the truth about Carmen's theft, the investigation would expand to include her. She'd face federal charges, lose her teaching position, and possibly serve prison time. But if I lied, Santos might escape full prosecution for his crimes. The aide prefers to remain anonymous for security reasons, I said, but I can confirm the authenticity of the stolen materials. Morrison nodded. We'll need to interview the aide eventually, but we can begin the investigation based on what you've provided. How long before you can move against Santos? These financial violations are clear-cut. We can probably make arrests within a week. Morrison closed the file. David, this is excellent work. You may have uncovered a significant foreign intelligence operation. Wednesday evening, Carmen announced that she was attending a weekend retreat with Santos's organization. What kind of retreat? Advanced organizing techniques. 3 days of intensive workshops on community building and political strategy. Carmen was packing clothes as she spoke, including the lingerie she'd bought with our credit card. It's at a conference center in West Virginia. Sounds intense. It will be. Miguel says this kind of immersive experience is crucial for developing true political consciousness. Carmen was planning to spend 3 days with Santos while federal agents prepared to arrest him. I needed to accelerate the timeline. When do you leave? Friday morning. I'll be back Sunday evening. That gave me 48 hours to finalize Santos's destruction. Thursday morning, I called Agent Morrison. Agent Morrison, I have additional intelligence on the Santos case. His organization is planning a major meeting this weekend that could provide evidence of ongoing criminal activity. What kind of meeting? An intensive training session with his core activists. If Santos is planning to expand his intelligence gathering operations, this would be when he'd coordinate it. Where is this meeting taking place? I gave him the details Carmen had provided about the West Virginia retreat. I recommend moving against Santos before the weekend. If he suspects federal scrutiny, he might flee the country. Understood. We're finalizing the arrest warrants now. Santos should be in custody by Friday afternoon. Perfect timing. Carmen would arrive at the retreat to find her mentor in federal custody, his organization in ruins, and her political awakening transformed into a criminal nightmare. Friday morning, Carmen left for her retreat with unusual excitement. She kissed me goodbye with more enthusiasm than she'd shown in months, as if she was embarking on some great adventure. I'll miss you, she said, though her expression suggested otherwise. Have a good time learning advanced organizing techniques. I will. Miguel says this weekend will change everything. Carmen had no idea how right she was. At 2 p.m., Agent Morrison called with an update. Santos is in custody. We arrested him at his apartment with a search warrant, found extensive evidence of foreign communications and unregistered financial transactions. What about his organization? We're executing search warrants on their offices and several associated properties. This is a significant operation, David. Your intelligence was crucial. What happens next? Santos will be charged with foreign agent violations, conspiracy, and financial crimes. Given the evidence you provided, he's looking at 15 to 20 years in federal prison. The retreat was scheduled to begin at 6 p.m. Carmen would arrive at the conference center to find chaos, confusion, and federal agents interviewing Santos's associates. At 8:30 p.m., my phone rang. Carmen's name appeared on the screen. David, something terrible has happened. What's wrong? Miguel's been arrested by the FBI. They're saying he's some kind of foreign agent. Carmen's voice was shaking. There are federal agents everywhere. They're questioning everyone who came to the retreat. That's awful. Are you okay? I don't understand what's happening. Miguel is a good man who fights for working families. This has to be some kind of mistake. Maybe you should come home. The agents want to interview everyone who's involved with the Community Action Coalition. They have lists of members and donors. Carmen paused. David, they might contact you. Contact me? Why? I listed you as my emergency contact on some of the organization's forms. If they're investigating Miguel's activities, they might want to talk to family members of people involved. Carmen had just admitted to putting my name on documents for an organization that was under federal investigation for foreign agent violations. If the FBI found those forms, they'd have questions about my knowledge of her activities. I'm sure it will be fine, I said. Just cooperate with the agents and tell them the truth. The truth is that Miguel is a hero who's being persecuted for fighting corporate power. Carmen's voice was growing stronger, more defiant. This is exactly the kind of political persecution he warned us about. Even with Santos in federal custody, facing decades in prison, Carmen still believed in his mission. Carmen returned home, Sunday evening devastated and angry. The FBI had questioned her for 6 hours about her involvement with Santos's organization, her knowledge of its funding sources, and her access to sensitive information. They treated me like a criminal, she said, throwing her bag down in the hallway. They asked about our marriage, your work, whether I'd ever seen confidential documents. What did you tell them? The truth. That I'm a teacher who cares about social justice, not some kind of spy. Carmen looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. David, they knew things about Miguel's organization that weren't public. Someone gave them detailed information about our activities. Maybe Santos was under surveillance. No, this was different. They had specific information about internal meetings, financial records, personal relationships. Carmen's eyes narrowed. Someone inside the movement betrayed us. She was partially right. Someone with inside access had provided the FBI with detailed intelligence about Santos's operation. But it wasn't a betrayal. It was justice. I'm sure the FBI is just being thorough. Thorough? Carmen's voice rose. David, they're destroying a man who dedicated his life to fighting for working families. They're using federal law enforcement to protect corporate interests. Or they're enforcing laws against foreign interference in American politics. Carmen stared at me for a long moment. You think Miguel is guilty? I think the FBI doesn't arrest people without evidence. The same FBI that spent decades persecuting civil rights leaders and anti-war activists? Carmen shook her head. You're so completely captured by the system that you can't see what's really happening. What's really happening is that your mentor is facing federal charges for taking money from foreign governments. Miguel was fighting for social justice. Miguel was using naive activists to gather intelligence for hostile foreign interests. Carmen's face went white. How do you know what Miguel was doing? The FBI hasn't released any details about their investigation. I'd made a mistake. In my anger, I'd revealed knowledge that I shouldn't have had access to as a private citizen. I'm just speculating based on the charges. No, you're not. Carmen's voice was deadly quiet. You know something specific about this investigation? We stared at each other across the kitchen. 8 years of marriage dissolving into suspicion and betrayal. Carmen, I think you're upset and not thinking clearly. I'm thinking more clearly than I have in years. Carmen picked up her bag and headed toward the stairs. I need to figure out what's really going on here. Monday morning, I arrived at the office to find Congressman Hayes waiting in my office. David, I've been briefed on the Santos arrest. Outstanding work. Thank you, sir. The FBI is very pleased with the intelligence you provided. Agent Morrison spoke with me personally about your contribution to the investigation. Hayes sat down across from my desk. However, there are some complications we need to discuss. My stomach tightened. What kind of complications? During their investigation, the FBI discovered that Santos's organization had access to congressional documents, campaign strategies, donor information, opposition research files. Hayes's expression was grave. Documents that match materials from this office. That's concerning. David, the FBI knows these documents came from a congressional aide's home office. They're asking questions about security protocols and document handling procedures. I remained silent, waiting to see how much Hayes knew. More specifically, they're asking about your security protocols and document handling procedures. The investigation had led back to me. Somehow, the FBI had connected the stolen documents to my office. Sir, I maintain strict security measures for all confidential materials. I'm sure you do. But David, the FBI found photographs of these documents on Santos's personal computer. High-resolution images that could only have been taken by someone with direct access to the materials. Hayes opened a folder and placed several photographs on my desk. They showed documents from my home office, taken with the same phone camera angles I'd observed Carmen using. Do you recognize these documents? Yes, sir. They're from my home files. Can you explain how Santos obtained high-resolution photographs of materials from your home office? This was the moment of truth. I could confess Carmen's theft and face the consequences, or I could lie to a congressman and federal investigators. No, sir. I cannot explain how Santos obtained these photographs. Hayes studied my face for several seconds. David, your loyalty to this organization has been exemplary for 8 years. Your work protecting our interests has been invaluable. I hope that loyalty extends to protecting our security interests as well. Of course, sir. Good. Because if there's been a security breach in your household, we need to address it immediately. Hayes collected the photographs. The FBI will want to interview you formally about these documents. I suggest you prepare carefully for that conversation. Tuesday afternoon, Agent Morrison called to schedule my FBI interview. David, We need to discuss the documents we found in Santos's possession. Some appear to have come from your home office. I understand. We'd like to meet tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Bring any relevant security logs or documentation about who has access to your home office. Will I need an attorney? That's your choice. Right now, you're a witness, not a suspect. But the documents we found represent a significant security breach. After hanging up, I realized I had less than 18 hours to decide whether to protect Carmen or save myself. That evening, Carmen worked late at school, claiming she needed to catch up on grading after missing days for the retreat. She didn't come home until after 10 p.m. How was your day? I asked when she finally walked into the kitchen. Difficult. The other teachers are asking questions about my involvement with Miguel's organization. The principal wants to meet with me tomorrow about potential security clearance issues. Security clearance issues. Anyone connected to Miguel's case is being reviewed for potential conflicts of interest. Carmen sat down at the kitchen table, looking exhausted. David, I could lose my job over this. I'm sorry this is happening to you. Carmen looked at me sharply. Are you? Because sometimes I think you're pleased that Miguel has been arrested. I'm not pleased that you're suffering. But you are pleased that Miguel is in federal custody. I didn't answer, which was answer enough. Carmen stood up from the table. I know you disagree with Miguel's politics, but he's a good man who was fighting for justice. This persecution will only make his message stronger. Carmen, Santos was taking money from foreign governments. That's not political persecution. It's law enforcement. According to who? The same government that Miguel was fighting against? Carmen's voice was rising again. David, can't you see that this is exactly what Miguel warned us about? The system will destroy anyone who threatens corporate power. The system will prosecute anyone who violates federal law. Federal laws written to protect corporate interests. We were talking in circles, our fundamental disagreement about Santos's guilt, making any resolution impossible. Carmen, I have to ask you something directly. I looked at her across the kitchen table. Did you ever give Santos information about my work? The question hung between us like a live wire. What kind of information? Any information. Documents, strategy discussions, donor names, anything related to my work for Congressman Hayes? Carmen was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. Miguel said that information about corporate political activities should be public knowledge. He said working families have a right to know who's funding campaigns against their interests. That's not an answer, Carmen. Yes. The word came out like a confession. I gave Miguel information about your work. Finally, the truth. What kind of information? Campaign strategies, donor lists, research files on progressive candidates. Carmen's voice was growing stronger, more defiant. Information that helped Miguel protect good people from political attacks. Carmen, do you understand what you've done? I understand that I helped expose a corrupt system that you're part of. You stole classified documents from a congressional office. You provided sensitive political intelligence to someone taking money from foreign governments. You've committed federal crimes. Carmen stood up from the table. I committed civil disobedience against a corrupt system. You committed espionage against your own country. I committed resistance against corporate fascism. Carmen's voice was shaking with anger. And I'd do it again. Wednesday morning, I sat in an FBI conference room across from Agent Morrison and two other investigators. A recording device sat on the table between us. David, we appreciate your cooperation in this investigation. As we discussed, we need to understand how Santos obtained sensitive congressional documents. I understand. We found high-resolution photographs of documents from your home office on Santos's personal computer and phone. Documents containing campaign strategies, donor information, and opposition research files. Agent Morrison placed several printed photographs on the table. The images were clear enough to read every word of the stolen documents. Do you recognize these materials? Yes, they're from my home office files. Who has access to your home office? This was the moment I'd been preparing for since Sunday evening. I could confess Carmen's theft and cooperation with Santos, which would result in federal charges against her. Or I could lie to federal investigators, which would result in federal charges against me. My wife Carmen has access to my home office. Does she work with congressional materials? No. She's a public school teacher. Has she ever expressed interest in your political work? She disagrees with my political work. She's more progressive in her views. Agent Morrison made notes on a legal pad. David, we need to ask directly. Do you believe your wife provided these documents to Santos? I looked at the photographs spread across the table. Evidence of Carmen's betrayal, captured in high-resolution detail. Proof that she'd systematically stolen sensitive political intelligence and provided it to a man with foreign connections. Yes, I believe my wife provided these documents to Santos. The words felt like a physical weight leaving my chest. When did you become aware of this theft? Sunday evening, Carmen admitted to giving Santos information about my work. Did you know about Santos's foreign connections when you provided us with initial intelligence about his organization? No. I discovered those connections during my research into his activities. Agent Morrison looked at his notes. So you began investigating Santos before you knew about the document theft? I'd reached another crucial moment. If I admitted that Carmen's affair had motivated my investigation, it would raise questions about my objectivity and methods. I began investigating Santos after noticing suspicious patterns in his organization's activities and funding sources. What kind of patterns? Unusually high-profile operations for a small nonprofit organization. Expensive offices and equipment that didn't match their reported revenue. Sophisticated political targeting that suggested professional intelligence capabilities. All true, but not the complete truth. And during this investigation, you discovered evidence of foreign funding violations? Yes. Santos's organization was receiving money from overseas sources without proper registration as foreign agents. Agent Morrison closed his notepad. David, your cooperation has been invaluable in this investigation. Santos is facing serious federal charges, and the intelligence you provided was crucial in building our case. What happens to my wife? That depends on the extent of her cooperation with Santos and her knowledge of his foreign connections. We'll need to interview her again with these new details. I drove home from the FBI interview, knowing that I'd just ended Carmen's career and possibly her freedom. But I'd also protected national security interests and upheld federal law. Carmen was waiting in the kitchen when I arrived home. How did your day go? She asked, though her tone suggested she already knew. I had a meeting with federal investigators. Carmen nodded slowly. About the documents they found in Miguel's possession. Yes. Documents that came from your home office. Yes. Carmen sat down at the kitchen table. David, what did you tell the FBI? I told them the truth. Which truth? That I gave Miguel information about your work or that you've been investigating Miguel for weeks? I stared at Carmen across the kitchen table. What do you mean? I mean that Miguel's arrest wasn't a coincidence. Someone provided the FBI with detailed intelligence about his organization, his funding sources, and his activities. Carmen's voice was calm, but her eyes were furious. Someone who had access to comprehensive information about Miguel's operations. Carmen, Santos was under federal investigation for legitimate reasons. Santos was under federal investigation because someone with inside knowledge provided detailed intelligence to the FBI. Carmen stood up from the table. David, I've been thinking about this for 3 days. The FBI knew too much, too quickly. They had financial records, personal information, organizational details that would take months to gather through normal surveillance. I remained silent. Unless someone with specialized research skills provided them with a comprehensive intelligence package. Carmen walked to the kitchen counter and picked up a manila folder. I found this in your office yesterday while you were at work. She opened the folder and spread its contents across the table. Financial records for Miguel's organization. Personal background information. Photographs of Miguel's apartment building. Phone records. Social media analysis. The folder contained copies of every document I'd compiled during my investigation of Santos. Evidence that I'd been systematically gathering intelligence on him for weeks. You built this file before Miguel was arrested, didn't you? I looked at the documents spread across our kitchen table. Proof of my comprehensive investigation into Santos's background, finances, and activities. Yes. How long have you been investigating Miguel? Since I saw you at the protest on television. Carmen's face went white. You saw me at the protest? 2 weeks ago, Channel 7's live coverage of the labor rights demonstration. You were holding a sign that said, 4 years together, still fighting. 4 years together with Miguel, Carmen said quietly. 4 years together with someone who wasn't your husband. Carmen sat down heavily in her chair. You've known about Miguel and me for 2 weeks. I've known you were lying to me for 2 weeks. I've known you were having an affair for 2 weeks. I've known you were stealing documents from my office for 2 weeks. And instead of confronting me, you decided to destroy Miguel. I decided to investigate Santos using the same techniques I use for political opposition research. What I found was a foreign agent operating an illegal intelligence gathering operation. Carmen stared at the documents on the table. You used your political warfare skills against your own wife. I used my investigative skills to protect national security interests. You used your investigative skills to eliminate your romantic rival. We sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of our mutual betrayal settling between us. Finally, Carmen spoke. David, what happens now? The FBI will interview you again. This time, they'll know you were involved with Santos personally and professionally. They'll want to understand the full extent of your cooperation with his organization. Will I be arrested? That depends on what you tell them and what role you played in Santos's activities. Carmen looked at the intelligence file spread across our kitchen table. And our marriage? I think our marriage ended 4 years ago when you decided Miguel Santos was more important than everything we'd built together. Carmen nodded slowly. You're right. It did end 4 years ago. I just didn't have the courage to admit it. Why Carmen? Why Santos? Why this cause? Carmen was quiet for a long time before answering. Because Miguel represented everything I thought you used to be before you got captured by the system. He was fighting for working families while you were helping corporations exploit them. He was standing up to power while you were serving it. Santos was taking money from foreign governments to undermine American political processes. Miguel was taking money from anyone who would support his fight for social justice. Even now, after everything that had happened, Carmen still believed in Santos's mission. Carmen, Santos used you. He identified you as the wife of a conservative political operative, seduced you, and manipulated you into stealing sensitive documents. You weren't his lover. You were his asset. Miguel loved me. Santos loved the access you provided to congressional intelligence. If you hadn't been married to someone with sensitive documents, he never would have looked at you twice. Carmen's eyes filled with tears. That's not true. Carmen, I have evidence that Santos used identical tactics with at least 6 other women over the past 5 years. All were married to men in conservative politics, business, or law enforcement. All provided him with confidential information from their husband's work. All left their marriages believing they were making a political statement. I opened my laptop and showed Carmen the research I'd compiled on Santos's previous relationships. 6 women, 6 broken marriages, 6 intelligence operations disguised as political awakening. Carmen stared at the screen in silence, reading about Santos's systematic pattern of targeting and exploitation. He did this to other women? Santos specialized in seducing wives of conservative men and converting them into intelligence assets. You were just his latest target. Carmen's hands shook as she scrolled through the evidence. He told me I was special. He said our connection was unique. He told all of them they were special. It's part of his operational technique. Carmen closed the laptop and buried her face in her hands. God, David, what have I done? You fell for a sophisticated intelligence operation designed to exploit your political beliefs and personal vulnerabilities. I betrayed our marriage for a man who was using me. Yes. Carmen looked up at me with tears streaming down her face. Can you ever forgive me? The question I'd been dreading for 2 weeks. Carmen, I don't know if forgiveness is possible after this level of betrayal. You didn't just have an affair. You helped a foreign agent steal classified political intelligence. You put my career at risk, threatened national security, and violated every principle of trust that marriage depends on. I know, I understand if you can't forgive me. But more than that, you chose to betray me because you believed Santos represented something morally superior to what I represent. You didn't just cheat on me. You rejected everything I stand for and work for. Carmen wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I thought I was fighting for justice. You were fighting against your own husband. Thursday morning, Agent Morrison called to schedule Carmen's follow-up interview. Mrs. Park, we need to discuss your relationship with Miguel Santos in light of new information we've received. I understand. We're particularly interested in your knowledge of Santos's funding sources and your role in providing him with congressional documents. Do I need an attorney? That's your choice, Mrs. Park. But I should inform you that you're now a subject of this investigation, not just a witness. Carmen scheduled the interview for Friday afternoon and spent the rest of Thursday consulting with a federal defense attorney. That evening, she sat at our kitchen table with legal documents spread in front of her. My attorney says I'm looking at federal charges for espionage, theft of government documents, and conspiracy. Carmen's voice was flat, emotionless. He thinks I might be able to negotiate a plea agreement if I cooperate fully with the investigation. What does cooperation mean? Testifying against Miguel about his funding sources, his intelligence gathering activities, and his relationships with other women, providing detailed information about everything I know regarding his organization. Will you do it? Carmen looked at the legal documents for several minutes before answering. David, if I cooperate with the FBI investigation, I'll be admitting that Miguel was everything you said he was. A foreign agent, a manipulator, a criminal. Because that's what he is. But if I cooperate, I'll also be admitting that I was completely wrong about everything I believed for the past 4 years. That my political awakening was actually an intelligence operation. That my commitment to social justice was really just naive cooperation with foreign interference. Carmen, the evidence is overwhelming. Santos was using you and his other targets to gather political intelligence for foreign governments. Your cooperation won't change what he did. It will just help ensure he faces appropriate consequences. And what about my consequences? Your attorney is right that cooperation will help with sentencing. But Carmen, you're going to face consequences regardless. The question is whether you want to help prevent Santos from continuing to victimize other women. Carmen nodded slowly. I'll cooperate with the investigation. Friday afternoon, I sat in the FBI conference room waiting area. while Carmen gave her statement in an adjacent room. Agent Morrison had assured me that her cooperation was comprehensive and valuable to the investigation. After 3 hours, Carmen emerged looking exhausted but resolute. How did it go? I asked as we walked to the parking garage. I told them everything. Miguel's funding sources, his relationships with other women, his intelligence gathering techniques, his plans for expanding operations. Carmen stopped walking and turned to face me. David, you were right about everything. Miguel was operating a sophisticated intelligence network, and I was just one of his assets. I'm sorry you had to learn that. Are you? Or are you satisfied that you proved I was wrong about everything? It was a fair question. I'd spent 2 weeks systematically destroying the man Carmen loved and the cause she believed in. Part of me was satisfied by the complete vindication of my investigation and methods. I'm satisfied that a foreign agent has been stopped. I'm not satisfied that stopping him required destroying our marriage. Carmen nodded. Our marriage was collateral damage in your war against Miguel. Our marriage was collateral damage in Santos's war against conservative politics. We stood in the parking garage in silence. 8 years of marriage reduced to competing theories about who was responsible for its destruction. What happens now? Carmen asked. You'll probably face federal charges, but your cooperation should result in a plea agreement with minimal prison time. You'll lose your security clearance and your teaching position. Santos will face decades in federal prison. And us? Carmen, I don't see how we come back from this. You betrayed our marriage for a man who was using you to gather intelligence against everything I work for. Even if I could forgive the affair, I can't forgive the espionage. Carmen's eyes filled with tears again. I know. I understand. I'll be filing for divorce next week. Carmen nodded. I expected that. I've already secured our joint assets and documented your security violations for the property settlement. Of course you have. Carmen wiped her eyes. David, you really are as ruthless as Miguel said you were. Santos was right about one thing. I am very good at destroying my enemies. Is that what I am now? Your enemy? Carmen, you stole classified documents from my office and provided them to a foreign agent. What would you call that? Carmen had no answer for that question. 6 months later, I sat in Congressman Hayes' office reviewing the fallout from the Santos investigation. Santos had been sentenced to 18 years in federal prison for foreign agent violations, espionage, and conspiracy charges. His Community Action Coalition had been dissolved, and several other activists had been charged with related crimes. Carmen had pled guilty to theft of government documents and received 2 years of probation with community service. She'd lost her teaching position and security clearance, making it unlikely she'd ever work in education again. The investigation had uncovered a broader foreign intelligence network operating through progressive activist organizations. Santos's arrest had led to additional prosecutions and significant reforms in foreign funding oversight. Outstanding work, David, Hayes said, closing the investigative summary. Your intelligence gathering was crucial in exposing this threat to our electoral process. Thank you, sir. The president himself has commended your contribution to national security. There's talk of a position with the National Security Council if you're interested. A NSC position would be the pinnacle of my career. Access to the highest levels of government, influence over national policy, prestige that would open doors throughout Washington. I'm honored by the consideration. You should be. Your skills in opposition research and political intelligence are exceptional. Hayes leaned back in his chair. David, I have to ask, how are you handling the personal aspects of this case? The divorce was finalized last month. Carmen has moved to another state to start over. That must have been difficult. It was necessary. Hayes nodded approvingly. Sometimes personal sacrifice is required to serve larger interests. Your willingness to prioritize national security over personal comfort demonstrates the kind of character we need in government service. I'd gained Hayes' ultimate respect by destroying my own wife's life in service of political objectives. The realization should have disturbed me more than it did. Sir, there is one thing I'd like to discuss about the Santos case. What's that? During the investigation, I used opposition research techniques and resources to gather personal intelligence on Santos. Some of that work was done on government time using congressional resources. Hayes was quiet for a moment. David, the Santos investigation was a matter of national security. Using our resources to protect American political processes was entirely appropriate. Even though my motivation was partially personal, your motivation was protecting classified information from foreign interference. The fact that your wife was involved made the case more personal, but it didn't make your actions less legitimate. Hayes was giving me complete absolution for using government resources to destroy my wife's lover and end my marriage. Thank you, sir. David, you've proven that you'll do whatever is necessary to protect our interests, even when it requires personal sacrifice. That kind of loyalty and effectiveness is exactly what makes you valuable to this organization. That evening, I sat in my empty house reviewing files for my next opposition research project. Hayes wanted comprehensive intelligence on a progressive gubernatorial candidate who was gaining momentum in a key swing state. The target was a former public defender who'd built his campaign around criminal justice reform and police accountability. Standard progressive positions that would be easy to counter with the right opposition research. I opened my laptop and began building a research file. Financial records, voting history, personal associations, potential vulnerabilities. The same systematic approach I'd used to destroy Santos applied to another target in the endless war for political advantage. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. David, this is Carmen. I know I have no right to contact you, but I wanted you to know that I'm doing better. I'm working as a substitute teacher in Oregon and starting therapy to understand how I got manipulated so completely. I know I can never undo the damage I caused, but I want you to know that I'm sorry for everything. I hope you find happiness. I stared at the message for several minutes, then deleted it without responding. Carmen had been an intelligence target who became a security threat. I'd neutralized the threat using appropriate methods and resources. The personal cost was regrettable but necessary. Hayes was right. Sometimes personal sacrifice was required to serve larger interests. I returned to my research on the progressive gubernatorial candidate, systematically building the case that would destroy his political career. Somewhere in his background, there would be financial irregularities, personal scandals, or association patterns that could be weaponized against him. Finding those vulnerabilities and exploiting them was what I did best. It was why Hayes valued me, why the NSC was interested in my services, why I'd built a career in Washington's most competitive field. The fact that I'd lost my marriage in the process was simply the cost of being exceptionally good at political warfare. My phone rang. The caller ID showed Agent Morrison's number. David, we have a new case that could use your expertise. Another foreign-funded activist organization that's been targeting conservative political families. What's the timeline? We need comprehensive intelligence within 2 weeks. It's the same operational model as Santos: romantic manipulation, document theft, political espionage. I'll start immediately. Excellent. David, your work on the Santos case has become a model for counterintelligence operations against foreign influence networks. We're very interested in your continued cooperation. Another opportunity to use my skills in service of national security. Another chance to prove my value to the political establishment. Another target to systematically investigate, expose, and destroy. I hung up the phone and opened a new research file. Somewhere out there, another Miguel Santos was manipulating American activists for foreign intelligence purposes. Another Carmen was betraying her marriage for someone who was using her. And I was very good at finding them both. 2 weeks later, I delivered a comprehensive intelligence package to the FBI that exposed another foreign-funded activist network operating in 3 states. The investigation resulted in 7 arrests, including another charismatic organizer who'd been seducing the wives of conservative political figures. Hayes recommended me for the NSC position with an enthusiastic endorsement that praised my exceptional ability to identify and neutralize threats to American political processes. I accepted the position and moved to a larger office with a higher security clearance and access to classified intelligence operations. 6 months after that, I was leading a team of analysts who specialized in identifying foreign influence networks targeting American political figures. We'd exposed 12 operations, resulted in 43 arrests, and prevented significant intelligence compromises. My reputation as a political researcher had evolved into expertise in counterintelligence and national security. The skills I developed destroying political opponents now served to protect American democracy from foreign manipulation. The personal cost of this career trajectory was manageable. I'd learned to compartmentalize emotional attachments and focus on operational objectives. Relationships were potential security vulnerabilities that required careful management. I dated occasionally, mostly other political professionals who understood the demands of Washington careers. Nothing serious, nothing that compromised my effectiveness or security clearance. Carmen sent one more message a year after our divorce. David, I wanted you to know that I'm getting married again. He's a good man who teaches middle school science. I think I understand now why you couldn't forgive me. I betrayed everything you worked for, and I did it for someone who was using me to hurt our country. I hope you found peace with your choices. I deleted that message too, without reading it a second time. Carmen had chosen political ideology over marriage, then discovered that her ideology was actually foreign manipulation. I'd chosen career advancement over personal relationships, and discovered that political warfare was more rewarding than emotional attachments. We'd both learned valuable lessons about the relationship between personal choices and professional success in Washington. The difference was that my choices had been vindicated by subsequent events, while hers had been exposed as naive cooperation with hostile foreign interests. I was very good at opposition research, political intelligence, and counterintelligence operations. These skills had brought me professional success, financial security, and recognition from the highest levels of government. The fact that they'd also cost me my marriage was simply proof that I'd chosen the more valuable path. In Washington, effectiveness mattered more than personal happiness. Results mattered more than relationships. Winning mattered more than anything else. And I was very good at winning.